Welcome to another interview with an energy expert. And today we're going to be talking to Professor David Lazell of the University of Calgary. And he and his organization, CESAR, have created the Energy Transition Accelerator that is doing really interesting work in researching pathways to decarbonizing the Canadian economy, including a lot of work on the hydrogen economy. So welcome to the interview, David.
Thank you.
Look, can you give us an overview of the accelerator? And I know it's not that old. I think you started it last year. But what are you trying to accomplish with it?
Well, the Transition Accelerator is a pan-Canadian, not-for-profit charitable organization that's been set up to try to step back and look at how do we accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy, in a way that is actually beneficial to jobs. It creates a vibrant economy, and but also addresses the issue of climate change and other issues. And I think one of the key things on the philosophy of the accelerator is that we recognize that for most Canadians, concerns about climate change aren't sufficiently compelling to get them to totally change the way they do things, to transform their human systems, if you like. And so what we've decided to do is to step back and say, well, there's a lot more wrong with many of our human systems, our agri-food system, our transportation system, the way we live in our cities, et cetera. There's a lot more wrong with those systems than just the greenhouse gas issue. So we step back and take a look at the complex systems that we've created to support our way of life and identify what's good about it, what doesn't work very well, and especially what are the transformative changes, new business models, new technologies, new transformations in our socio-technical systems that are already at play, that are starting to disrupt the systems that we have. And so when we do that, we find that there are some opportunities to direct those disruptions to deal with climate change.
Now, if I understand the accelerator correctly, it's kind of a think tank for the energy transition. And if that's the case, are you doing policy documents? Is that the focus?
It's actually a think tank and a do tank. What we start with is try to understand the fundamental systems. We then try to bring together a coalition of the willing, who are interested in transformational change in each of the sectors that we're looking at, and what ideas do they have about building a better future that addresses climate change, but it may also mean a more efficient system, something that gives you better service, or the kind of things that drive people to make changes in systems, right? So we bring those industries together, those environmental groups, government departments. And then we do a lot of techno-economic analysis. We analyze what about the existing system and about what are alternative pathways to get us to a different future. And in the end, it's a highly iterative process. So that's where the think tank part is, if you like. But what we really try to do is to identify and support industries, government, environment, other groups to come together and to spin out consortia that will actually start on the transition.
Now, I know you're involved in a number of projects, but let's pick on one just to kind of illustrate what the kind of work that the accelerator does. And that's the hydrogen project, because especially I think it's around long haul trucking, and that's really exciting. And I think there's a tremendous amount of potential for Alberta and Canada in general in this. Why don't you give us a brief overview of what that project's about?
Well, we started that project by going and talking to the trucking companies. We were saying, well, what are your problems? What are your issues? That led us to eventually found that there was a real interest in that sector about moving to electric drive vehicles, and especially hydrogen fuel cell electric drive vehicles. So one of the first things we did is to go back and look at how would we actually do this, and where would it work, and what are the economics of it, and what are the barriers. And we learned from that in fact, actually Alberta is considered internationally in the world as one of the lowest cost places in the world to make hydrogen without carbon emissions. They still make it from fossil fuels, but you basically take a hydrocarbon and you split the hydro and the carbon, and you leave the carbon in the ground and you take the hydrogen, right? And in the process, we saw, there's a sweet spot opportunity to actually bring that together and start doing demonstration and trial programs. So we brought a suite of companies together, Ballard to make the fuel cells, Freightliner is providing the trucks, Dana Transport is providing electric axles. Another part of Dana is a assembler of vehicles, and Nordressa, fuel cell companies like H-Tech, fueling station companies, and put together and got some funding from Emission Reductions Alberta to build two very large, these are 63-ton trucks that would have enough fuel, hydrogen on board from fueling up in Edmonton, be able to drive a 63-ton load to Calgary, drop off the load, pick up another load, drive it back, 700 kilometers between refueling. And those trucks will be on the road in about 14 or 15 months from now in mid-2021 and be tested for 18 months. Taking them through summer and winter conditions, all sorts of different loads. And what we hope to learn from that is how close is this technology to actually deliver for under Canadian conditions, heavy freight under Canadian conditions. So that work is really led to a number of other studies to actually be able to grow out the demand for hydrogen and expand from 2 trucks to many trucks.
This will be my final question, David, and I've been reporting on the energy transition now for 6 or 7 years, and I'm very impressed with how in the last couple of years, the interest and the commitment, the interest by everybody, including governments and industry, and the commitment, particularly by industry and government, has really increased. And people are committed to decarbonization and making that pivot to the low carbon economy. So are you finding you have a lot of support, say, for the hydrogen project in trucking? Are there other projects that are, are you finding what I'm describing, that, people are basically on board with this?
Absolutely. I think part of the realization after thinking about and working on climate change, people around the world have been doing it for 25 or 30 years. Most of the focus in the last 25 years has been on incremental changes. A little bit of reductions here, a little bit of reductions there. I think there's been a realization in the last 3 or 4 years that we really need to talk about being net zero by mid-century. The problem of climate change problem is clear. That changes the focus dramatically. When you know you're actually aiming to be net zero, a lot of the incremental stuff, just realize it's a dead-end pathway. It's not going to take us to where we need to go. And so what that's done is brought a real interest around when you actually look at net zero pathways that actually can achieve net zero. There's most of the things fall off the table as just not being feasible. Hydrogen comes on the table as being, well, this is where we need to go, and let's figure out how we get there. So it's not only the trucking, we're lots of interest in bus fleets and municipal bus fleets, et cetera, interest in heavy vehicles, off-road vehicles that use a lot of diesel fuel. A real interest in hydrogen mixing into natural gas pipelines to decarbonize space and water heating in houses. And there are a number of initiatives around the world on that. A lot more interest in how you can actually produce hydrogen without carbon emissions at a very low cost and actually move it around in pipelines. So there's lots of companies coming in and thinking, oh, this is actually something that we could not only create and solve the environmental problem, but we actually can make more money than the way we do it now. There's actually a possibility of solving a bunch of problems. And so we can see a vision of a transformative systems that will actually get us, has a potential to get us to net zero by 2050.
Well, David, thank you very much. It's fascinating to find out what the accelerator is up to after you introduced me to it last fall. Sounds like you've made a lot of progress, so good luck in the future. And we look forward to reporting on some of these stories. I think that Albertans and Canadians in general need to know how innovative Canadians are and how in this particular area, we're actually leading the parade a little bit.
Indeed, and thank you very much for the opportunity.